Ed, you want to kick off the session? Yeah, 3 o'clock.
Okay, thanks, Angeline. Hello and welcome. My name is Ed Farrelly. I'm the head of the real estate practice for Marsh in Asia, and it's my great pleasure to be your moderator today. In this session, we're going to look at what occupiers want from real estate, how owners are responding, particularly in terms of sustainability, resilience, and why strong ESG credentials make perfect sense today. I'll be joined by Calvin Kwan, who is Head of Sustainability and Risk Governance for Linkreat, by Hannah Jung, who is Head of Valuations and Advisory Services for Colliers Hong Kong, and by our own Christina Vigilante, who is Head of Sales and Corporate and Commercial Segments for Marsh in Asia. So we'll have short presentations from both Hannah and Calvin, and then that will be followed by a Q&A session. But first, Christine's going to kick off by walking us through some of the themes for today. So with so much to get through, let's just get straight into it, shall we? Christina.
Thank you so much, Ed, and it's a great privilege to be here with you and Hannah and Calvin today and all of our participants to just speak a little bit about some of the trends that we've seen play out over the last year and that we believe will certainly accelerate into the future. And you know, in the real estate industry, it's really been a very, very interesting 18-month period for us as we've seen some of the trends that were already at play in the real estate industry have certainly accelerated through COVID-19. And you know, there's been a lot of discussion around what the future of work will hold for us. And I think while we expect that there will probably be some sort of, you know, reversion to the mean in terms of, you know, work patterns that we saw in the past, it's certainly proven out for us over the past year that people, you know, can work very well from home and flexibly and from different places, frankly, around the globe. And so we think that, you know, this hybrid way of working that provides the benefit of people still being able to come together in the office, but also have kind of the efficiency of being able to work from home and flexibly really will be here to stay. So there's quite a lot of, I think, lasting impact from that area that we'll see. The other thing that we've seen play out over the last 12 months is this trend towards e-commerce. And we know that many of our you know, large properties, large real estate properties, were very much so mixed use type properties. And so that trend towards e-commerce, as well as the trend towards changes in restaurants, food and beverage, home delivery, all will adapt kind of the way that properties are designed and used going forward. Now, in the case of office space, that's an interesting thing to talk about as we certainly have seen some examples of, you know, office space being handed back. But what we are seeing is that that likely will not be to as great of an extent as one might imagine. And that's because, you know, what a lot of employers have realized is that the office really has to become a tool of attraction, a place to bring people together, a place for collaboration and culture and creativity to be fostered. And frankly, that is what, you know, is so needed in colleagues having to work remotely and separately for the last year. And so offices really can be designed to foster that and be a place where that can be attained. And so actually what we see is a lot of occupiers thinking about how do they actually rework their spaces, to engage their employee base differently. And we do see a trend towards investment in that as well. And I would say alongside that, what comes with that is really a flight to quality. So a lot of focus on wellness, efficiency, and the green qualifications of buildings. And so that becomes yet another aspect of attracting people to buildings as a place that they want to be and spend their time. So we certainly know that, you know, occupiers are acting on the back of all of these changes. We know that essentially what will happen is that buildings will need to become more resilient, both physically and operationally in the future. That's for absolutely certain. And there's clear signs that, you know, stakeholders are taking that very seriously and are doing quite a lot of planning to that effect. So we expect that that will influence, the holistic approach from a risk management perspective, and data will be used to provide decision support in how we kind of plan for and make these changes. So there's certainly a lot to unpack there. Experts much better positioned than I to comment on all of that, but those are absolutely the trends we see, Ed, playing out for us. So with that, I will hand it back to you.
Thanks, Christina. Great synopsis. And as you say, lots to unpack. So to start the unpacking, Hannah, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you, Ed. Let me share my screen with the audience first. All right, so good afternoon, everyone. Very happy to be here today. I hope everyone had a good lunch if you are in Singapore or Hong Kong time zone here. So my name is Hannah. I'm heading Valuation Advisory Services in Hong Kong office in Colliers. My specialty is really on the valuation. So today I will cover mainly what is ESG impacting, how is it impacting on the real estate investment, especially on their value. So I would like to go through, we want to all contribute to the good cause. We want to do better. We want to stand up from the competition. We want to have a better tenants, but what's the real impact? So I will just elaborate some of the case studies here today. Today, we will not go through what is the fundamental of ESG. I believe a lot of you here in the room are quite expert or already quite interested about ESG. So assuming that, I think what I want to highlight is ESG is not something very optional. The green initiative became a must item for many of the landlords and going forward as well. So we need to plan ahead and study green retrofits, because new buildings, yes, they know the requirement, they know what they need to do, but it's all about older buildings. So the retrofit will be very important to monitor the performance of a requirement and getting an additional certificate to sustain the building going forward. And we also need to be aware that many of the local government, they are putting ESG as a mandatory requirement going forward. So instead of reacting late, we can prepare in advance. So tackle the risk and protect the value of the asset in the near future, so that we are not really penalized by the government. And there are smart technologies available in the market to mitigate the risk and looking after the performance of the building. The cost will not be as significant as a physical capex, but effect can be very significant for a lot of investors. So in Hong Kong, we are running by different popular certificates available in the market. So Hong Kong government, we have a BEAM Plus, and then many of landlords are looking at getting a LEED certificate as well as a WELL certificate. I think WELL is getting more recognition in the market because it's not only the landlord's perspective or energy saving or cost saving perspective. WELL is more like really the end user within the building, how we can maintain our well-being. And that's really recognized well in the market. So among these certificates, what they will look at it is mainly 6 categories. So natural ventilation, waste reduction, green technology, energy efficiency, greenery inside and outside of the building, and then water conservation. Very important items and have to meet certain requirements to obtain those certificates. But what's more important is these are really contributing to the value of the asset. So in order to go through the case study, and I want to eliminate, in Hong Kong, the lands are so expensive. So they have a different location and that different views will just justify a lot of the numbers differently. So we try to find the buildings with a very similar location and then similar views. So I have eliminated those requirements. Then we are looking at the Kowloon Bay and Kwun Tong. These are, we call CBD2 within Hong Kong. So Seabourn Center, they built in 2009 versus Neo is built in 2019. So although NEO's occupancy rate is not as high as Sibon due to the different launching time, 2019 was a tough time for Hong Kong due to the social unrest. But you can see the rental difference is around 10%. And if we look at the Kowloon Bay area, Exchange Tower, they built in 10 years earlier than the FT Life Tower, and their performance, both towers receiving similar occupancy, but the rental difference is around 10%. And FT Life Tower, the brand name is so important for them as an insurance company, and they were able to achieve a different requirement from the Beams Plus as well as the US lead, and they were able to attract high-profile tenants. And if I move to the Hong Kong Island, so we have one of the decentralized location, we call it Island East. So there we collect 4 different buildings. So 2 buildings, 633 Kings Road and Carey Center, they are older building. And then we have a newer building such as K11, Artillery Kings Road, and Untitled Place. This one is even more obvious in terms of rental difference. So newer building, they are well equipped with the green initiative. So they got all the proper certificates, and they are providing really different quality of the building to the tenant. So they were able to secure good profile of a tenant and able to achieve a 40% higher rental value than other buildings who doesn't have this kind of certificates. And I think Untitled Place is one of a very successful case. So they opened in 2018, but during the pre-leasing stage of 2017, they were able to commit 100% from the different tenants, such as law firms, accounting firms, even tech companies. And their rental level was highest among the Island East. We don't believe this is just because of the newer building. It's more on the green initiatives contribute to the rental value. So within the Swire portfolio, which is located in the Island East, you can see Untitled Place having all the certificate, and they are able to meet the quality of the building by green aspects. Their rental can be like 40% higher than within the portfolio, which is a much older building without any green ESG features. And also it's important that not only 40% different rental value, but also these tenants like Prudential, Bupa, they are looking at the space outside of this building because it doesn't fit to their ESG requirement anymore. So what's important here is not only getting a premium, but also if you don't do the retrofits or you don't meet the ESG features, going forward, you will be out of the league. So key takeaway from my presentation is really in Hong Kong, or even general Asia, we have seen the rental premium at least 10% difference between ESG features without ESG feature buildings. And when we do the valuation, we will evaluate cap rate very seriously on these ESG features. And we have generally adapting up to 50 basis point lower cap rate for the building who has an ESG initiative, because we see the risk without ESG features, they will diminish quite significantly from the market, from the tenant perspective, from the rental perspective. So some of the investors worry, okay, now the market is downtime, how much do I need to spend to gain that 40% difference? My building is already older, so I will not get that 40%, maybe maximum will be 10%. Then how should I justify my investment? There are 2 cost engineer we can look at it. One is a hardware side, the other one is a software side. Hardware side is really the green retrofit or some body checkup of your building and getting a certification upgrade that will help. Sometimes the cost is not as significant as what landlord think, and there are surely the return by cost saving as well in terms of energy and the waste and water consumption too. One thing I want to highlight here is really the software. So green certificates, especially in Hong Kong, we have a free professional advisors available, mainly contributed by government. So knocking up those doors and then getting those advisory will be very, very useful for the landlords or investors. There are additional certificates from what I mentioned, Beams Plus and Lease. There are also specific sectors we can get those certificates too. So here, one thing, software I mentioned, what is a free services available. So one of the benefits joining this Hong Kong AEE, there are free professional advice from the organization. So you can get compliance checking, you can get basic information where you are now and what kind of things you can do as a quick win. And then once you qualify that, then you will be recognized as from the Hong Kong Green organization. I'm sure in this audience, we have different people from different countries. There are government initiatives and that's very cost effective. So I highly recommend investors look for those available resources within your own market. So thank you very much. This is my presentation today. And I will pass to Kevin.
Thanks, Hannah. Ed, is it okay if I start?
Please go ahead, Calvin. Just want to reinforce before you do, if anybody has any questions, please submit using the tab below. But Calvin, all yours.
Thank you very much. Hannah, thank you very much for your presentation as well. So let me share screen here. That should be good. So you've all just heard from Hannah about a little bit about how ESG can add value, literally, to property valuations. I'm going to step back a little bit and give some insight into how Link REIT has looked at ESG, sustainability, and how essentially how the recent COVID issues and challenges that we've dealt with in Hong Kong have influenced and reshaped how we continue to move forward on sustainability in hopes of making sure our organization is more resilient. So just a quick overview for those of you not familiar with Link. We have a diversified portfolio with 130 properties in Hong Kong, 7 mainland China, 2 overseas, retail spaces and office spaces. You can see on the right-hand side, the breakdown by percentages, roughly 80 Hong Kong, 17 China, 4 overseas as well. But what I really want to talk about today is really that for Link, sustainability has always been about delicately balancing the dynamics between governance, social challenges, environment, and also prosperity. For governance, it's really about making sure that we're transparent in regards to how we manage our business. On the environment side, making sure that we actually reduce our environmental footprint, energy, waste, water. On the social side, it's about understanding the people we work with, the people that are around us, and the people that we influence. How does our business create value for those around us? And lastly, for sustainability, I've touched on ESG, but true sustainability, we also have to take into account prosperity. How does the organization grow? How do we continue to deliver sustainably growing returns for investors? And again, how do we make sure that people around us are thriving as well? With that in mind, it really got us to think a little bit about how we approach our business. On this particular slide, you'll see what we call business as usual. Link, an organization, is typically at the center. Surrounding it are the different stakeholders. And you can see the arrows here that the communication is typically one way. The organization tells the stakeholders what we expect, what we want, and align. And that's typically how businesses have operated throughout history. But one thing that we've realized is that a business as usual approach is not the most effective way to deal with ESG, global challenges, sustainability issues, climate change, because these are all-encompassing issues that reach out to a whole bunch of different stakeholders. If I summarize it, if Link became the most sustainable business in the world, we still wouldn't have that big of an impact on the global challenges of climate change. What we have to do is get other people to buy into this and understand the role that they play. So what we've created, or what we've re-articulated, is a philosophy called business as mutual. Now in this, you'll notice from the previous section that at the center of this ecosystem is no longer an organization, but rather the ecosystem issues that multiple stakeholders will face. You'll have overlapping challenges, overlapping concerns. And if these organizations can work together to address those issues, you perhaps have better and more fit for purpose solutions. For Link, we don't just interact individually with different stakeholders. We believe that we're actually a platform working with tenants, vendors, contractors, service providers, and the communities to align the different challenges that we have and figure out how we might be able to work together to address these, in particular climate change. One of the best examples that we have of business as mutual is the work with TCFD. So many of you have heard of TCFD, Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures, and their efforts to get organizations to start quantifying how climate change will impact their bottom line. With this project, what we realized quickly was that different geographies, different companies, different industries had different interpretations. Investors understood TCFD in one particular way, real estate companies, depending on geography, had another interpretation. What this means that it's very difficult for any of us to put together a so-called TCFD compliant methodology. So we started working with other organizations. You can see on this particular screen. We have other real estate companies, we have investors, we have financial institutions, and we have a few consultants on here as well. And the purpose of this was for these organizations to communicate and collaborate on the issue of what is the TCFD compliant methodology for the real estate sector? How do we put this together so that investors understand how to interpret the information so that real estate companies around the world, regardless of geography, can report on the same information and compare themselves against each other? And how do consultants help align some of these definitions as well? So if we were able to do this, or the idea was to create a model that multiple geographies, multiple companies, multiple industries could use to advance their TCFD reporting methodology. This is just a schematic kind of showing you what the working group did, figuring out what the model for the impact was, agree on what cost calculations and assumptions are, put together the financial modeling and different scenarios, and then finally come up with essentially what is called climate value at risk. And the beauty of this is that we, as a group of pilot real estate companies and investors, we identified a methodology for us to all of us use and essentially plug in the coordinates of your physical assets, and it would churn out a number that would say this is the value of your portfolio that's at risk. It gives us a good understanding of what's going on with our own individual portfolios. But more importantly, it gave us an understanding to compare with other people on almost an apples for apples comparison. This also enabled investors to understand what data that they're looking at and how do they start comparing different investment opportunities as well. So the beauty behind this was by working together with other organizations, we're able to create almost an aligned approach to looking at TCFD for the real estate sector. When real estate companies did this, each one of them would have a chart kind of outlining the physical risks and the transitional risks that might be associated with each individual property. And again, because all the companies are getting the same analysis, it helps all of us make it helps us all make informed and better decision and helps investors to compare, again, apples to apples. Now let's look at business as mutual from an internal standpoint. And for us, we've been able to use this to improve our approach to risk management. Through business as mutual, we've actually transitioned a fairly, what has traditionally been a siloed approach to risk management into something that's been more of co-creation, more about collaboration among different departments. We've used business as mutual to create co-created risk registers so that we can understand how risks in one department may affect another department. We found a way to use business as mutual to improve how we integrate risks in our operations, and it's focused on the ecosystem, which I mentioned earlier. And lastly, through business as mutual, we're able to use a risk management framework to actually create value. Let me show you that in this particular schematic. You're familiar with the top-down approach, top-down, bottom-up approach to risk management. But what we added was actually on the left and right, the internal component in terms of getting feedback from the front line about some of the issues and challenges that they're facing and feeding it back into a risk management approach. And more importantly, on the right-hand side, the external side, getting feedback from outside people. What are the issues they're concerned about? What can we do better? How can we improve upon this? Building on this, one of the things is that we actually reach out to our stakeholders through anonymous surveys so that we get honest and open opinions. We've changed the way we ask people, what are they concerned about? In the past, materiality assessments typically ask, Ed, I'm going to put you on the spot. It says, should Ed care about waste management? Should Ed care about energy efficiency? And the answers are always going to be absolutely, because me as a responder it doesn't have any impact on me. It's all on Ed. But what we started doing was changing the question to say, what are you concerned about? So Ed, what are you concerned about? Not what you think I should care about. And we're starting to get a lot more honest answers. And you can see on the left-hand side, the top issues, top and bottom issues. You'll see that changes in customer preferences, climate change impacts, public health crises all came up in the top 5 issues among all of our stakeholders. And what that means is that we can now start aligning on some of these key issues with links vendors, contractors, tenants, and service providers. Surprisingly, common issues such as energy, waste, and all that kind of fell towards the bottom end of the list. Probably because most organizations are dealing with these already, and they feel that they already have a good grasp. So what I'm trying to say is that with this, it's actually shaped how we get feedback from our environment, from the different stakeholders, and that helps us become a little bit more resilient by understanding what the common challenges we have. I am going to end my presentation on this as part of our engagement process and part of our resilience as well. We've recently just launched or announced our net zero emissions target. We want to achieve this by 2035, probably 15 years ahead of most governments and organizations. This is going to lean heavily on our energy efficiency. It's going to lean heavily on purchasing, installing renewable energy, and looking at direct investments in solar PV and even carbon credits. But the reason why I'm showing this here is because we actually have to engage most of our stakeholders, our tenants especially, and our contractors on helping us to achieve this particular vision of achieving net zero carbon emissions by 2035. In the end, all this does revolve around being able to live and breathe this ethos of business as mutual, so that we actually achieve sustainability with the other people around within our ecosystem. So Ed, I'll turn over the time back over to you. Thanks.
Thanks, Calvin. Terrific stuff, and thank you, Hannah, before that. I think we could have dedicated an entire hour to each of your presentations and had a Q&A following those, so maybe something for the future there. What I'm going to do is just going to kind of step back and pick through some of the things that you've both spoken about and Christina brought up at the start. And Hannah, if I can go back to you to start with. You spoke of some really interesting things about sustainability and wellness. And I just ask you to dig a bit deeper. What are occupiers saying to you and saying to Colliers? What are they looking for? And are they actually taking a step back from buildings or reconsidering buildings if they don't score well on these ESG principles?
I think answer is yes. Most of the MNCs, if they have a headquarters in Europe or North America, where they have a very strong internal guidelines on the ESG requirement, and financial institutions and insurance company, they are selecting buildings with a green initiative or ESG requirement basis. So if the building itself is not having any of this requirement or certification, they cannot even look at it. So it's not about rental determination. It's like if we have a few cases with the insurance company, they say the building must have a LEED certificate and the BEAM Plus in Hong Kong. And even we have a very good deal in this particular building, newly built, brand new, very good view, but clients say we can't choose those buildings. So it becomes not only the premium aspect, but it becomes just a basic requirement. So yes, we do see this trend more and more. And I think not only MNCs from overseas, we believe even Asian companies or even Hong Kong companies, they will raise the bar on this requirement.
And on sustainability, if we look at the credential, for example, the LEED certificates, I recall many years ago when landlords or developers were kind of starting to look at this. It was a nice thing to have, and now it's become something that you absolutely need to have. And the journey to get from where we were to where we are was quite slow because people they weren't sure about whether the numbers stacked up initially, and now they obviously do. It makes financial sense. Can we say the same about wellness? Because wellness it's kind of it could be a similar journey, but we're behind in that journey. So, can you talk a little bit about, does it make financial sense to build in wellness into buildings?
I think the recognition is absolutely rising, and I believe after the COVID, we realized how important the air quality within the building, within our office space, and even water quality, whether we install the filter, whether there is any vending machine producing any junk food. So all these are requirements of the WELL certificate, and that became very important. But what's difference is WELL certificate can be obtained by tenant. So nothing to do with the landlord. If within my space, I install the sensors for people to control the internal air quality or air conditioner temperature or water quality, all these I concerned, and WELL certificate can be obtained by tenant within your space. So that's something not must be provided by landlord, but it's many of the companies are looking at it right now. And interestingly, working from home environment make people stay at home longer, and COVID during the lockdown and or restriction, etc., we spending more time within our residential apartment or our houses, right? And developers are putting a WELL certificate when they do the first-hand sales. I think this is quite a significant movement, because from commercial landlords or commercial investors moving to the developers who building a residential, they also concerned, and they believe that this is something adding value on their pricing. So that I think going forward, the WELL should be much faster than before 2020.
Yeah, that's an interesting point you bring up about resi. It'll be interesting to see how that is rolled out. And I think on the commercial side, my own view is that wellness and sustainability in buildings. Offices, for example, offices now, they're even though we spend less time there, perhaps they're even more important. And some of the things that Christina spoke about culture, about creativity, about collaboration. So the office is even more important, and also as a tool to attract and retain talent, I think. So I don't think the office is dead at all. I think it's got a great future ahead, and I think it will be even more relevant. And then just one final question for you for the moment for you, Hannah. Climate change risk, is that being built into valuations, or how is that addressed?
At this moment, we are not considering that at the valuation, because it's something happening in the future. What happens if our temperature increases 2%, 2 degrees more, then how much sea level will rise? So that's not a requirement at this moment. But what we understand is our investors, our client, are saying internally there is a guideline coming out, and the risk profile of properties are changing. So if there's a different scenario, so say warning 1, warning 2, warning 3, that level of sea level rise, then your property is in risk or not, and they will evaluate their portfolio again whether they have any risk on the flooding or coastal flooding, etc. And going forward, if the properties are located in certain countries or in certain cities with that danger zoning of different requirements, they will avoid investing on those properties. So again, it's not something about premium, it's about the basic fundamentals. So you will be out of the choice on the investment mandate or investment portfolio. So they will be out of the league. That's what we can say. So in Hong Kong, we do have a lot of water frontage. We used to pay premium on the water frontage properties. I think that over next 10 years, the investment requirement will be shift, and then rather setback from the coastal line will have a higher value. We do foresee this coming up, despite we have a very occasional natural disaster. But I think we have experienced 2 years ago when we had a Typhoon 10, that was how serious the insurance companies relook at the reinstatement coverage on all the windows blowing away at the waterfront location. So I think these will structure in our evaluation going forward. At the same time, not only just discount aspect, it just become not the choice of any investment pool going forward.
That's a fascinating point, and certainly something to look forward to over the next number of years to see how that shift maybe from, as you say, the waterfront back in.
But although we want to reduce all these carbon, so that we hope that the sea level doesn't rise anymore. Yeah, that's our position at this moment. Yes.
Absolutely, I agree with that.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks for that, Hannah. Christina, if I can just move on to you. And we've spoken about asset valuations, and Hannah's makes really good points there. And that's looking at market value. Well, I just want you, if you can, just to talk for a moment about insurance valuations and why they're important for landlords.
Absolutely, happy to, Ed. So, in the traditional context, when we think about insurance valuations, and certainly with with the pandemic taking place, we were encouraging many clients to have another look at their valuations of their property on the basis of ensuring that they were really covered to the appropriate limit, not overinsured, not underinsured, but to insured to their exposure, and that the premium that they were paying was well aligned to the exposure that they had. And obviously, depending on the line of business, and then kind of the metrics that drive the exposure in that line of business. Example being hospitality, footfall through your property can be a driver of how your premium is set. And so if that's changed, significantly, then that's something that would affect your valuations from an insurance perspective. And then that's something you would want to make sure was calibrated appropriately so that you're, protected adequately. Now, when we apply, and Ed, you and I have had many conversations about this, and when you apply the lens of ESG to that in terms of kind of the valuations of the building, one thing I can say is that, more and more insurers and underwriters are looking at the quality of the asset as a key input and criteria from an underwriting perspective, and thinking about how that impacts kind of their appetite for the risk, and ultimately how much risk they're willing to premium. And so, I can't say at this point that, we can't make a direct comment. This is really new at this juncture, as to how strong the correlation is between, the quality of the asset and how that impacts the underwriting criteria. But clearly we see that insurers are looking much more favorably at high quality, efficient, green, sustainable assets. And we believe that over time, as underwriters kind of get more and more of this into their model, they certainly will be looking at these sustainable assets much more favorably, which will likely lend itself to one of two outcomes: either access to a higher degree of capital, or access to capital at more attractive pricing. So we're certainly encouraging our clients to really be thoughtful about the values on their properties, and really how they position themselves and think about themselves and the improvements that they want to make from an ESG perspective.
Thanks, Christina. And just to stay with you for a moment, resilience obviously is a key topic in real estate, and we've seen over the past year, just in the face of the pandemic, just one risk, how important business continuity is. So when we're looking at an array of risks with existing and emerging risks, what steps can be done to mitigate this risk, or to improve or to reduce the frequency and intensity of losses, improve business continuity?
Yeah, absolutely, and it is a neat question, because I think one thing that I can say for sure is that I think the events of the last year and a half have really taught us that risks are so much more interconnected than perhaps previously acknowledged or manage them, and so we really can no longer kind of tuck our risk management strategy into a series of silos that run parallel to each other. This is our professional risk. This is our property risk. This is our third party risk. There's so many kind of macro events of different kinds, economic issues, public health issues, environmental issues that have knock-on effects to each other, that then are creating kind of a much more interwoven and complex landscape of risk for our clients today. And so what we've seen, and we just recently did our risk resilience diagnostic, which really looked at risk across 6 key vectors that clients experience. So that's everything from cyber risk to pandemic risk to environmental risk to geopolitical risk. And the findings of that survey, we were able to survey nearly 2,000 clients, is that the vast majority of our clients feel that they were not adequately prepared from a scenario planning perspective, from a quantitative perspective, looking at what really is the impact to the balance sheet of one risk and the ripple effects of that touching other risks. And from having business continuity plans that are really modern and flexible that work well for them. So I think the key takeaways are to get really engaged in risk in a very kind of holistic, broader organizational way, try to go cross-functional, try to break down silos. And if you have a risk professional that you're working with, whether that be a broker, an agent, or a consultant, try to engage them on what more holistic resources they have available to you to help you do appropriate planning, quantitatively, scenario analysis, running audits, running checks, and all of that. Because what we've learned is that, as I said, these BCP plans, most organizations have one, but they certainly need to be much more agile than they were. And that's what this past year has shown us.
That's great. Thanks, Christina. So if I've had some questions sent through to me, which I'm moving through. If anybody has any other questions, please submit to the Q&A or in the chat. And indeed, we've got one for you, Calvin. Thanks, Tommy, for sending through. So Calvin, why is transition cost risk higher than physical cost risk on your TCFD slide?
Why is transitional risk costs higher than physical? Well, simply, I think that it's a lot easier to predict what the physical risks are. So, when we work with our insurance brokers or insurance companies, we have a good understanding of what the physical risks might be, and we can guess where that's going to go. There's plenty of data that we can use to map out what impact a flood scenario might have on our portfolio. The problem with transitional risk is then you come up with policies and regulations, and there's a lot of uncertainty behind that. Some policies might be straightforward, a carbon tax, and this is how much it's going to be, and we can project where the carbon tax will go, and then factor that in to our portfolio as well. But then what happens, as Hannah mentioned a little bit of, when certain things become standard, whether it's LEED certification, well certification, or maybe there's a new embodied carbon certification that will come up in the future. And all of this will require us to make major changes to the portfolio. A lot of this is actually, we don't know. Well, it's just unknown on the transitional risks. And we're making up for that, by increasing the uncertainty. Because of the uncertainty on transitional risk, there's a much greater likelihood of that being much more costly. It'll change, it can potentially change how we do things.
Okay, thanks, Calvin. And just to stay with you, and I want to focus on community, and it, because I think the impact of the built environment on the community is something that I'm hearing more and more these days. And I was interested to hear you mention, I scribbled down some notes when you were talking. On one slide, you spoke about the social part. You mentioned the people we influence. And then the phrase you have as business as mutual. So can you just spend some time talking to me about the role that real estate owners have to play in improving communities?
Well, I think that, we spend, well, what is that estimate? 80% of our, time that we're awake inside a building, whether it's an office building, residential building, and so forth. So real estate plays a huge role in a lot of different things, whether we're healthy, whether we're happy, and so forth. And in the past, people would just build a building for the sake of, building whatever they felt like having. But for Link, one of the key things for us is that we've always had to work with the community because of the way our portfolio has been constructed. We own the retail component. Right above us are our residential housing, and below us are our transportation. So we've always realized and accepted that people around us are the ones that will be coming to our shopping centers. For those of you who are living in Hong Kong, you realize that the housing here, you've heard that people live in shoe boxes here. So therefore, it's natural for people to want to go downstairs to the shopping center as an extension of their living room. And when you take that approach, when you start thinking, okay, if this is going to be my living room, what do I want here? And you start thinking about that and use that approach. You start imagining how you can create vibrant communities in your shopping center that people are proud of. With Hong Kong, it ends up becoming how to create a shopping center or retail property where people will say, hey, when friends want to visit, they say, hey, come to our shopping center instead of going to someone else's, right? That's the social component about it. With properties, you have to create places that are vibrant, that are thriving. That's where your tenants will come in. That's where your shoppers will come in as well. If I shift away from just the retail side and look at office buildings, again, historically, office buildings have just been a place where you rent out to corporate tenants. People come in, come out. But increasingly, we're seeing that office spaces are being transformed for some of the reasons that have been mentioned by Christina and Hannah as well. But it's also office spaces can be vibrant locations as well. How do you create a place where the office tenants that go up, once they're off of work, they still stay in that building? Maybe it's to have a drink, maybe it's to catch up with other people, maybe it's to have a meal. And that can help increase the value of your property. That can help bring other people outside people towards your properties as well. So all of this really starts from looking at your building design, looking at your plot area, and looking at it from a social standpoint. How do we create a community? And you'd be surprised, what we put in. The last kind of analogy I would say is, just the design of some of our own buildings. For our flagship property, the Quayside in Hong Kong, they were originally designed as two standalone towers. But by twisting them 45 degrees, we're able to connect the two towers and make it into one giant tower. But in the center, you're creating a hub area where any corporate that comes in here can use that area to naturally bring all their staff in, and they can gravitate towards a social area. And that helps our tenants, employees be happy as well. So it really, all of this comes down to thinking about it from a social community type of perspective.
I think by doing that as well, you've also been able to put in about a 50,000 square foot floor plate, if I'm not mistaken. So you can get everybody on the same floor and no need to go up and down elevators or lifts. So yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Hannah will have to update her slide with our building next time.
I'm sure she will. She'll have taken a note of that. Okay, so we've got a question. Thank you, Sian, for putting it through. And it's open to whoever wants to answer this, but Christina, maybe you'll have a view on this as well. But I'll just read out, given that almost all corporations have been able to pivot to work from home almost seamlessly since the start of COVID-19, albeit some had to overcome some initial IT infra issues, how relevant is BCP planning as we knew it? How does BCP need to evolve in a hybrid working world?
Sure, Ed, happy to take a comment on that, and then perhaps maybe you want to comment on yourself as well. But we definitely see, BCP and BCP plans are one of the key conversation that we're having with all of our clients right now, because, irrespective of the industry, we found that BCP plans are needing to evolve. The typical drivers of BCP plans, as respects real estate, really, as Hannah referenced in the past, were predicated perhaps more on kind of the location, the occupation, the size, some of the features of the building. Whereas now we see that the patterns are changing really significantly. The number of people that are in the building, is significantly different, and some of the requirements in terms of making sure that the workplace remains safe has changed significantly as well. We've seen examples of that, in this past year where buildings were being kind of retrofitted with, plexiglass between spaces and to keep individuals safe. So, without a doubt, and very often, many organizations, their BCP plans are something that's been kind of sitting on a shelf for a number of years and collecting dust, and they haven't looked at them, thankfully, because perhaps they haven't really needed them. But with the events of the past year, we feel that there is a strong need to reevaluate those plans, reevaluate the key drivers, the aspects that you have covered in your BCP plans, the collaboration. So for example, if you are a multi-location operation, if you are a multi-country operation, if you have partnerships, how aligned are your BCP plans with the partners that you have to work and engage with? And how do they provide for people who may or may not be able to get ingress or egress into the office, depending on the situation? So that's kind of my comment, Ed, that it's something we're speaking to all our clients about. And it's something that really needs to be reviewed for those 6 key vectors of risk that I spoke about earlier. Of course, not the least of which being environmental related risks, health risks, and technology risks. So I don't know, Ed, if there's any more specific comments from you.
No, I think that's pretty comprehensive, Christina. One thing that interests me, I think, is when we're talking about the workplace and how the workplace now, obviously with working from home, it encapsulates people's own residences. So from a risk perspective and insurance coverage, how does that pan out? And there are products now out there which have evolved to cover people when they are working from home for any injury that may occur. So it's it has for some time, it has been a bit of a gray area, but I think that's been nailed down to a greater extent now. But certainly the conversation has shifted. Okay, Hannah, if I can go back to you, there was a question that I jotted down earlier that I wanted to get in. When you spoke about retrofitting buildings, I'm interested. Would that mostly occur, say, for example, in a midtown location? Because I see a lot of the new build is going in decentralized areas, and demand is shifting to decentralized locations, especially when we're talking about flight to quality. CBD will still be in demand from a locational perspective, but in that kind of area in between and midtown, how do you see demand panning out there, the impact evaluations, or is that an area where you would say it's prime for retrofit?
I think the retrofit is not really subject to location. It's really the building quality itself or age itself. But where we are looking at this moment is really we see like Wanchai. Wanchai is a super infrastructure hub going to be, because we are going to open another exhibition MTR station, and there will be connecting to Shatin or North to within 20 minutes and extra line to the MRT, etc. So Wanchai, we look at, that's called Midtown. So between the central and also we are going to the east direction. So that's the location we see number of buildings are older, but they are accommodating large profile corporates, especially from PRCs and other overseas countries. So Wanchai is the one location. And then we also looking at these, continuously looking at the Kowloon, Kuntong and Kowloon Bay. There are buildings we call industrial office. So that has the retrofit itself looking good, doesn't help anymore. So they need to do one more step, and that's the green retrofit. And that's the landlords of those IO buildings we call industrial office buildings are seriously looking at as much as they can. They have to fight for the occupancy going forward.
I think the example you use in Wanchai, it's in Hong Kong, is pretty good. The midtown location, a lot of old buildings, and some of those buildings have been occupied by the same occupier for many years. and the aircon in the building has never been replaced or upgraded. So it's a very, very old aircon system. So again, now we're all more aware of pandemic or epidemic risk, and that's something that would certainly need to be addressed. Excuse me. So we've still got a few minutes left, and Calvin, if I can go back to you and just to pick up on something, and I'm going to throw out some stats, and I'm going to read them here. Some studies that have been done by Marsh McClellan, and if I can just pick them up here correctly, employers with an attractive image among young talents have 25% better ESG performance than average employers. In addition, employers with highly satisfied employees score 14% higher on ESG performance than the global average. So can you just speak about ESG internally with the workforce in your own organization? And this is picking up on some conversations we had previously, in which you may elaborate on, about how you bring the entire workforce of all ages, all levels into the conversation.
So let's see, where do I begin with this one? I think that one of the key things with ESG performance is that I think of what Christine has mentioned in her presentation. People are just aligned with this. You have corporates that want to be in a well-certified building, a LEED certified building. People expect that now. And typically companies that have been quick to adopt LEED, or actually now WELL, or even fit well, they tend to be a little bit more dynamic. They tend to be a little bit more responsive and understanding of the workforce's needs. And when employees, myself included, when we feel that management sees that and responds to it, I think it's a sense of pride. Look, we want to be in a healthy building. I want to be in a place where if I'm spending 9-10 hours of the day in the office, I want to enjoy it. So getting those types of certification do show that we're important. This whole issue of ESG sustainability, how do we get everyone involved, is actually quite interesting. I mentioned earlier about our net zero strategy, net zero 2035. There's a reason why I chose 2035. It's personally because I feel that setting a 2050 target is almost irresponsible for me to do that, because the chances of me being at link 20 in 2050 are not very high. Which means that I could probably set a target and be really ambitious, but I'm not the one that oversees its delivery. With our net zero target, we set it 2035 so that it's within a reasonable amount of time where the people working on it may still be at link to oversee its execution and success. The second part of about it is that the team that we put together was actually fairly young. Late 20s, early 30s, average ages. And the reason for this is because these linkers are going to be the ones that really will be, or are more likely to be at link at 2035. More importantly, they are giving the opportunity to help create and help develop the strategy on something that's quite important for the business. This creates that ownership, that sense of ownership, and pride that we're involved in something long-term for the organization. So this is one example of how you can use ESG, sustainability, net zero as a way to galvanize efforts across ages, across departments, and hopefully across organizations as well. So that's been fun. The team has been working on this cross interdepartmental team has been working on this, and from what I hear, as of last week, they were still pretty excited and happy with the net zero strategy.
Okay, thanks, Calvin. I wanted to speak today about tech and prop tech and cyber risk, but I have promised everybody that we'd finish up within the hour, so we're at the top of the hour. So we'll leave that for another day. So just want to say a huge thank you to Hannah, Calvin, Christina. It's been very, very insightful. I've really enjoyed it. And thank you, everybody, for tuning in, and have a great day ahead.
Thank you.